Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and today we have a very special episode because we're going to be talking about sibling estrangement and navigating in low effort families. So this is a very, very important subject that has been brought upon us, I think, by some members in our group, and especially it was time for us to start talking about this because this is something very prevalent for a number of us. So, in Ashley Barnwell's groundbreaking article, she actually wrote something called "Family Estrangement and the Unseen Work of Not of the Not Doing Family." And the author presents a concept that's called the non-doing family. And in today's episode, we're going to explore the characteristics of what exactly is a not doing family, how best to navigate this unfortunate reality. So, Fern, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for being a part of this.
Well, great to be here. The no effort or the low effort family is something that it's one of these things that I think is often modeled in childhood, and then the model is repeated in adulthood. And one of the places I saw this was when my mother was living in a senior residence, and these people in their 80s and 90s were carefully monitoring whose children were coming because it was a clear statement of how successful they had been as a family member and whether their kids loved them. And this was almost like a competition. And every time one of the children showed up, it was noted. And the reason I mention this is that the low effort families were probably the no-shows.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's very interesting when you think about it because this can apply in many different areas, right? It can apply with parents, it can apply with siblings, and I think that it's really, really interesting. And I've seen this also with some clients that have told me about this as well, right? When they're in that type of family where they feel they're not being celebrated and such. So, and acknowledged, which is really what is the underlying issue here, right? It's the lack of acknowledgement through this lack of celebration and such. Um, I think this is a good segue into defining what is the not doing family. I think this is a good way for us to get into that because, put simply, it's the unseen, often hidden work of withholding or omitting the expected acts of kinship through which estrangement is maintained and made real. And I think in sociology, there's a tradition of studying doing families, right? The ones that have rituals, that have displays of affection, practices that affirm family. Barnwell in this article extends this by looking at what is withheld. And I think that Barnwell argues that what is not done, the withdrawals, the silences, the failures to perform expected family acts, is as constitutive of estrangement as what is actively done, which is the break, the refusal, and such to partake in a relationship. So she wants us to see estrangement as not only a visible rupture, but also a set of absent practices.
Yeah, it's really on a spectrum. And it's sometimes hard to tell whether you have a low effort family or you actually have shunning and estrangement.
Mhm.
Um, and because these families have such poor communication skills, you don't know what's going on. You
Yeah,
can't determine, you can't tweeze out whether this somebody's upset with you. All you know is there's very little contact.
yeah, exactly. And that's really, really important because a lot of times this is what ends up hurting people, right? People that are left out, hoping for more and such. And I think that that's really one of the things that is a highlight of this, especially the hallmarks and such. So, what are some of these absent practices? Let's talk about that, right? Because I think that Barnwell really brings up specific key practices here that are important to mention for us in the sibling estrangement community. It's the idea of managing disclosure in the sense that people often don't speak openly about the estrangement or disclose only to a few trusted others. So they may hide or downplay the estrangement in social settings, right? And we've talked before about this, right? The discomfort associated with bringing up estrangement with people that are not receptive.
Right, or highly defensive. So if you're going to say something, you're going to get your head bit off, which is not enticing.
Yeah, exactly, right? And the second point that Barnwell brings up is checking on. And even after the overt cutoff, some people don't completely cease awareness or monitoring, right? So they may peek at social media, news or updates on the extended or the estranged family member's life and such, and sometimes in a secretive type of way, right? So we've talked about this as well, I think you and I before, about some people that sometimes tend to still want to look, still want to kind of scratch that itch, and kind of go and explore in some ways and somehow wanting to have a rapport or a relation of some sort despite the cutoff, right?
Yeah, and you just don't know whether you can approach someone because you don't know whether they're open to the conversation about this or if you're not respecting their boundaries. I mean, it's a very confusing world if you are left to your own interpretations.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? And the third point is, of course, speaking, acting, or reacting, or in this case, not speaking, acting, or reacting. People may deliberately withhold expected family practices like birthdays, holiday greetings, calls, visits, or responses to overtures. And they may refrain from reacting to events like important life milestones that normal families would actually trigger outreach. So this is important, right? Often this is why we call it the not doing family and such. This is what sparks the low effort and such. It's the idea that there's not a sense of showing up, right? We were talking about this just before the video, you and I, right? The lack of showing up in a relationship with somebody at key moments.
But if there's narcissism in the mix, which oftentimes with estrangement, there is narcissism in the mix, there are people walking on eggshells. And that means they don't know what to do or how to approach. And so I think that's a component as well of these low effort families.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important to mention here too, right? So, what's the emotional impact associated to not doing and such? I think it's really, really important. It's one of them is invisible neglect, right? It's the idea of somehow that important moments are forgotten or ignored, and that can lead to feelings of being unseen, being unimportant, like we were mentioning before, right? And just a sense of how this affects our overall self-worth, especially. I think this is important when it comes to sibling relationships and such. If they're seen as hollow or meaningless, this can really spark a withdrawal that can lead to estrangement.
I think too that it's important to keep in mind that these patterns aren't fixed, and sometimes families go through stressful times, and they fall into these patterns of non-communication. The driver of that can be chronic stress or burnout, mental health issues, as you said, the lack of structure or routine. Um, Lack of the technology overuse.
Yep,
People lean on their technology so much that they forget how they actually connect with one another.
yep,
Physical health issues. There are all sorts of reasons why there can be some withdrawal. Again, if you don't talk about it, you're not going to know the reasons behind it.
exactly. So some can be very specific, but others can be more abstract, I think, like say low self-esteem and such, right? If
Hmm?
somebody has like a low self-esteem, they're not going to want to necessarily put themselves out there and risk failure or disappointment and such. And so sometimes people will pull back because of their own level of limited self-esteem that they have on themselves, which in turn, unfortunately, has the effect of not doing in some families. And
Mhm.
that leads to disappointment, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, and there's ambiguity sometimes, right? Like we're talking about, the sense of not knowing what is going on with the other person, and what ends up happening is that can turn sometimes against others, right? By thinking that somehow do I matter, right? And that can really be stressful and draining, I think. And this is the thing that can sometimes lead people to choose estrangement simply for the relief that can come with a finality to the ambiguity sometimes.
And a lot of there, as we're saying, there are a lot of misperceptions in all this. So you may be acting without facts and really experience a breakdown in the family because of it.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, something else that happens is, right, there can be accumulated resentment. I think small omissions that tend to pile up over time, right? These omissions can really be difficult because that can turn into unspoken resentment and disappointment. And again, that can be I think, a defining factor in estrangement within siblings and such, because it can make people make it easier for people to fall into indifference, and that's the risk that comes with having to experience a cutoff with a brother or sister. It's when indifference settles in. So,
Wouldn't it be nice if people could say to each other, I need to see you more often? Would you be open to a meal every so often
yeah.
or some way in which we can connect?
Yeah. And we're going to get into some of these strategies, right? I think that's, like you're saying, that's really, really important, that because in normal families, that's kind of what happens, right? Where there's people that are fully showing up in some families, they will be talking more along those lines. And I think that a lot of times there's erosion of rituals of belonging. And what you're describing is a sense of inclusiveness that is sometimes lacking. And what lacks is these rituals of belonging, right? And there's no shared rituals that are present, like check-ins, traditions or get-togethers, right? Then that can cause us to feel as though we're outsiders in our own family, which unfortunately can breed exclusion and the conclusion that we're not really a part of that family.
I think divorce plays into this too, because when you have the breakdown of the family, if some people aren't included, then the children may feel they're betraying one parent or the other.
Yeah,
It's very complicated once you start to see families fractionalizing.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's sad when you see that happen, because there could be another type of outcome that could be experienced that wouldn't need to lead to that. And another aspect that is, of course, that can affect and be a hallmark of not doing families is invalidation of emotional needs, right? Ignoring needs for recomfort or recognition, repair attempts after conflicts. And I think that when people don't respond in some of these key moments, it can lead people to think that their needs don't matter again, right? And a lot of times, if one feels that a sibling relationship is one-sided, then that can lead to disengagement and estrangement as well.
When children experience not being seen or heard, they often establish that as a core belief that I don't matter and I'm not worthy. And when they grow up, it's reinforced by these low effort families. So you have to be careful that these old issues don't repeat and reemerge.
Hmm. By all means, very, very important. Another one is emotional inconsistency, right? When there's a flash of recognition and connection, these moments often are short-lived in these types of families. And it's this inconsistency that can lead to destabilizing trust, because it's the gravitating between a cycle of hope and hopelessness that can, of course, elicit confusion and such, especially. And I think that that can really take a toll on people's heads, and this can leave us becoming stuck in this pattern of hope and hopelessness, or ultimately breaking away altogether just for the sake of inner peace, when some people get fed up enough with this that they choose to not participate in this anymore. So this is the risk factor that comes up. I think this type of emotional inconsistency, I think, oftentimes is present with a number of sibling relationships that have gone estranged.
And we've talked about this in previous episodes, but you have to be careful that you're not pulling the plug too quickly.
Yep.
I wanted to make one other comment earlier, and that is that women are often the social organizers of families, and they can often take it personally when they make an effort and it is not received well. And so I think women, particularly, at least in Western culture, feel much more responsible for carrying the family forward.
Hmm.
And then they feel the failure harder when it doesn't work out so well.
Yes. Yes. I think that there's a lot that's being put on women's shoulders, especially when it comes to that. And especially when people have key roles within families and such, that can sometimes be harder for them, especially. So let's talk about what we can do, right? And we kind of led into that somewhat just in our discussion, but it's important that we let our viewers know that there are certain things that maybe they can do when they're going through situations like this. And One of the first things I would mention is that people recognize that some people within a family can fall into an avoidance pattern as a means of getting away from discomfort rather than risk rejection or conflict within a family. So it might be less about us and more about their own internal struggles, right, in dealing with stress and perhaps different matters and such that can lead to people not showing up.
Yeah, and in those cases, it's probably best to start small with manageable goals, such as eating a meal together or taking a short walk as a family. And those small victories could build confidence and I hope momentum.
You're absolutely right. I think that's really important, right? And to look at different types of ways that you can, of course, have in terms of low energy contact options, for example, sharing, say, low effort updates like emoticons or photos. That can be a way to engage in such a way that you're protecting yourself from being emotionally drained, where you're not the one always having to justify yourself, but rather still engaging in a proactive type of way. So I like to call this proportionality when people feel that they need to meet somebody at their level. It's often on a proportional type of level and way.
Especially with younger people because they engage on texts and through photos. And so it's important for parents, particularly, to take advantage of the technology so that they can interact with their kids and meet them where they're willing to go.
Absolutely. And that's really, really important, of course, to find any type of outlets that can help to do that. And become aware of omission dynamics. I think that's another thing that's really important to help us, right? It's recognizing the compounding effect of omission of a birthday call or no response to a message and such. You know, what that can do, right? Do we want to meet a mission with a mission? And I think sometimes invoking a proactive reaching out action can help to show that we did something to gain a different outcome, even if that outcome fails to materialize. So it's a little bit like reaching out towards people sometimes with the birthday card and such. This is a big question in our community, right? Where people ask this question, should I do that or not? And one of the conclusions we come up with is either yes, it's good if you're doing that, so you exercise your potential. So I think that's where this is going in that sense with being aware of emission dynamics. It's the idea of being proactive and still doing something for the sake of doing something because it matters to you because that's who you are as a person. That's really, really important also.
And then, of course, if you're on the receiving end and you appreciate it to reinforce the effort, I think that will make a big difference. They feel validated if you recognize what they've done.
Right, exactly. And I think that creating structured opportunities also is very important, right? And rather than just having a vague hope for reconnection, trying to set a specific time and date, right? Not just saying, oh, we should meet together sometime, you know? Well, the sometime ends up floating, if you will, over us and never quite materializing because it's not specific, right? And I
Right.
think that that's really important. Set a specific time and date so that way that can help to really foster those bonds and even just asking, you want to grab some coffee on Sunday, for example, choosing something like that that involves less decision making on their parts when we're the ones volunteering or suggesting something.
Yeah, you have to see where there are cracks, where you can find a cracked door and open it. And I think what you're saying, try to find coffee. And if you can't find a cracked door, maybe you need to seek help
Yeah.
through a professional who might be able to help mediate some of this.
Exactly. I think that's really, really important, right? And that's another point that is key for us also to choose other safe people to practice disclosing information to, right? Might be a friend, might be a therapist or support group, right? There can be a sense of validation that comes through this when you're reaching out to somebody that you know will be able to hold that connection with you. And I think the ability in building strength through safe disclosure potentially can help in extending this with a low effort family whether we get the response we need or not, it's sometimes about practicing us bringing it out in such a way that we can share with them without having that expectation that something's going to come back to us, right?
And I'm going to come back to what I said in the beginning. Unlike that senior residence that I mentioned to you, I think it's important not to compare
Yeah.
because that's just a nasty trap. So, um, whatever you get in your family, you have to make it feel like it's enough. Be careful that you don't have these high expectations that you can't, people won't meet or can't meet.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really, really important to be mindful of that. So, Fern, we're almost out of time. Let's talk about resources. What would be your number one resource at this time?
Well, I have been doing coaching and we talked about a lot of the things that you and I have talked about here today. So if some of our viewers are interested, they surely can reach out to me and we can see if we might be able to alleviate some of the challenge, the pain of their experiences.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really important, of course, to do that. On my end, my number one resource at this time is Navigating the Stages of Grief with Sibling Estrangement workshop. That's going to be actually continuing in October for some people that might be interested in joining. And if you're watching this video at a later time, it's likely that the video will be available in the fall season, generally speaking, as well. So do look up the calendar if you want, dear viewers. And of course, I do offer some individual sessions on helping people navigate through their sibling estrangement. If you'd rather do this on an individual basis with a psychotherapist, you can certainly do that with me. And I think that's important to have somebody like us that knows things inside out on this subject, that has actually gone through it, makes a world of difference because we understand it precisely because of that. One more resource I have is the online support group. If you're not sure where you can speak or where you can get in touch with people going through this, the online support group is an excellent resource for people to join. So I invite you to take a look at that on siblingestrangement.com. You will see that, I think, in the group section, and you can, of course, reach out to me and register if you'd like for this important resource. So, all right. Well, Fern, this has been a wonderful episode. I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about this because this is an important subject I think that's been coming up for a number of people. And my hope is that people are walking away with more now in terms of understanding this and what they can do with it.
Great to see you again.
Absolutely. We'll continue on many more subjects next time. So you take care.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.